What every family should know, opioids in Ohio. Presented in partnership with DEA Operation Engage, the Mark Wahlberg Youth Foundation, and community partner Walmart.
Ground zero for this epidemic was Dayton, Ohio.
An epidemic that impacts us all.
They say you have to hit rock bottom, and the thing that really scared us was rock bottom was death.
Losing loved ones as 2 News searches for answers.
We're not going to arrest our way out of this problem.
An addiction that attacks everyone.
It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't profile. It doesn't go after a certain person. It could be anyone.
But we hold on to hope with treatments that can save lives.
All I gotta say is you're not alone. There's people out there that want to help you.
What every family should know as we look into Ohio's opioid epidemic. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm John Seibel.
And I'm Brooke Moore.
Ohio has one of the highest drug death rates in the entire country. And tonight, we are asking those on the front lines, how did we get here? And what do we need to do about it?
Well, throughout our program, we're going to hear from people like the Montgomery County coroner, as well as local law enforcement, those in recovery, and those who have lost loved ones to this epidemic.
So how did we get here? During a 3-month period last year, out of every 100,000 Ohioans, 11 died of a drug overdose. It's one of the highest drug death rates in the country. And for Ohio, it's an all-time record. It also came at the height of the pandemic. The men and women on the front line say they're frustrated but determined. That includes Attorney General Dave Yost, who says he is hopeful but not yet optimistic.
Optimism means that I have data that suggests it's getting better, and right now that data is not there. But there's things in the works that I have hope that we're going to see better days.
Yost added his office seized 27 pounds of fentanyl last year alone.
In Montgomery County, more than 300 people died from an unintentional overdose last year. Current data from public health shows we will likely eclipse that number by the end of this year. But there is some good news. The numbers we are seeing now are much lower than when the epidemic was at its height in 2017, where 566 people accidentally overdosed. At that time, the country was number 1 in the county was number 1 in the state for opioid deaths. Now it's 14th, a sign that progress is being made.
We have, since 2017, been able to bring resources into our county to help drop those numbers, but we still need to keep doing what we're doing. We still need treatment programs. We need to focus on education.
Sheriff Streck adds the pandemic caused a rise in drug use and mental health issues, including a huge rise in meth coming into the area.
Mayor Nan Whaley echoed the sheriff. She took office as mayor in 2014 and has seen her city at its worst and watched as it slowly healed. Still, while Dayton did cut overdose deaths in half over that time period, there's still much work to do.
We didn't just turn away and say we don't have a problem. We faced that challenge head on. And I have to give a lot of credit to the leadership of the entire community, from public health to the county to our judges, all coming together and saying, okay, what are we going to do to attack this issue, to make our community safer and to give people a better chance at kicking their addiction.
Some of those who have seen this problem firsthand are Dayton Police and the DEA. Both have been on the ground trying to find a way to help the community they serve. Here's my conversation with 3 people on the front lines of that fight right here in the Miami Valley. They arrived in 2012. Within 5 years, it was a full-blown epidemic.
I mean, the sheer loss of life was just blew you away as a human being and a police officer.
Opioid use exploded in the Miami Valley, specifically Montgomery County. 600 overdose deaths in 2017, 81 in the month of May alone.
You're used to seeing death as a law enforcement officer, but 81 people in a month was just mind-blowing.
The opioid problem was spiraling out of control, and with limited resources, Major Brian Johns of the Dayton Police Department relied on instinct and guts, diving into the community himself to be part of the solution.
And I actually, I got into my unmarked car with Winnie Jackson from DEA. We worked with people who were already in long-term recovery because no one knows what a person in addiction needs besides someone who's actually been there. And we actually went there and we begged them to go get treatment.
What Major Johns is describing is the difference between the appearance of effort and an actual effort. You can't fake this. So they decide to just go door to door. That's horribly inefficient because it's an individual approach, but that's what it has to be.
And from that, the GROW initiative was born. It stands for Get Recovery Options Working. John says he and Wendy Jackson from the DEA started knocking on doors, not looking to put addicts behind bars, but to get them help and healthy. The DEA is in lockstep with Johns and the DPD, acknowledging handcuffs cannot be the primary tact in attacking opioids.
We're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. That's why we're here, is the awareness that we need to bring law enforcement to the public. I think they need to be aware of what we can do together, because we aren't going to do this by ourselves.
Schumacher says their three-pronged approach is working, making sure all law enforcement is collaborating and sharing intelligence, talking with and educating pharmacies and doctors, and lastly, engaging the community.
Initiatives, the National Take Back program, that saves thousands of lives. We also just recently started what's called the Operation Prevention, which is a great opportunity for families to get on this website. It's interactive, you can learn, because you have to talk to your loved ones about this addiction and drugs, because if you don't, somebody will.
John says they are also addressing the mental health side of opioid addiction as well, relying heavily on Adamus and 3 officers whose entire job is to follow up on mental health complaints. Courts in Dayton and Montgomery County are also focusing on mental health for a group of people John says has no business being in the criminal justice system.
We have compassion for someone who is drug addicted. Now, I don't have a lot of compassion for someone who actually sells drugs and causes somebody to die. I have zero compassion for them.
We're the advocate, not the adversary for addicts. We want them to succeed.
We also spoke with acting U.S. District Attorney Vipal Patel. He agrees the solution is not arresting those who are addicted and struggling, but he says at the federal level, that's not what they are dealing with. They're having to figure out what to do about the enforcement side, which includes going after those who are supplying drugs.
This idea of getting communities addicted is part of their business plan. And so we need to take that and understand what their role is and what their mindset is. And it's not to help us. It's not to have fun. It's strictly to make money off the backs, agony, suffering of our sons and daughters here in the Dayton area.
Patel adds he does not believe this is a law enforcement crisis. He says it's a health crisis and believes people like the Surgeon General need to wrap their arms around those who are addicted.
The DEA is working to curb opioid addiction all across the nation. To help with that effort, they have a program called the DEA 360, which takes a 3-pronged approach at combating heroin and opioid use. Joining us now to talk about that here and his own journey with addiction is Jim Wahlberg. He's the executive director of the Mark Wahlberg Youth Foundation and is also an activist, filmmaker, and author. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today. Let's start by telling us why opioid misuse and addiction is important to the Wahlberg Foundation.
Well, it really should be important to everybody as far as we're concerned. We're losing an astronomical amount of young people across the country to this opioid epidemic. The numbers in America just this past year were well over 75,000 overdose deaths. And those are the ones that are actually reported as overdose deaths. We suspect that the number is much higher. So anything that's killing that many people is something that we should all be very concerned about, I think.
Yeah, and it's certainly affecting us here in the Miami Valley as well. Let's talk about the DEA 360, this specific program. Explain to us what this is and how it works.
So this is the educational component to the DEA. And we're honored to be part of that educational drive, if you will. There's many ways to look at addiction and many ways to sort of look at this epidemic. And usually with law enforcement, the DEA is a law enforcement agency. Their job is to arrest people and lock people up that are selling this poison. But, you know, we also need to educate our young people, right, so that they don't find themselves in the position of being fully addicted to this poison or being killed by this poison. So, you know, a few years ago, I made a film called If Only, which this event is sort of wrapped around. And I was approached by a friend of mine who said, "Hey, I want to do an event. I want this event to be 5,000 kids." And I said, "It can't be done." I said, "You can't put 5,000 kids in an arena, shut off the lights, and expect that we're going to have people behaving themselves." And, you know, to his credit, we did it. And the DEA was there and they were with us. And they were like, "This is exactly what we're looking for. This epidemic is huge and we need to address it in a huge way." And so the very next event we did it, partnered with the DEA, and we had 10,000 kids at that particular event.
That is extremely impressive, and obviously education is key when it comes to combating this problem. Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic, because it's certainly making it hard for people to connect with each other. Do you think this is going to have an impact on people? It probably already has, but as it relates to substance use disorder, what about people in early recovery?
Well, this is actually what, you know, I would call the perfect storm, right? So recovery is community, it's connection, it's love, it's friendship, it's brotherhood and sisterhood, right? It's all about connection, right? And addiction is all about isolation and separation and depression. And when you sort of isolate people, you know, by law, right? We're all going to be isolated and separated and not connected and not being able to see each other in person and connect in person. It's the perfect storm. And, you know, I think that we haven't even seen really the full impact of what this pandemic has done in reference to addiction and the opioid addiction crisis in particular. You know, the numbers prior to COVID, the numbers, we were starting to see a real downtick in the overdose deaths from opioids. And as soon as COVID hit, I mean, we've seen a complete explosion.
We're definitely seeing that here in our area. Absolutely. Jim, yourself, as someone in long-term recovery, what's your advice to a person who's feeling like they're ready to get help?
Everybody has one of these cell phones. Everybody's on these cell phones 24 hours a day. Use it as a tool to save your life. There is help available. There are treatment centers across the country, both for folks with and without health insurance, right? And, you know, obviously, if you don't have health insurance, it might be a longer wait, but there's help available.
We will have much more on Jim's journey and what he thinks you need to know if you or a loved one are struggling. That's coming up in our next half hour.
And we hope you stick around after the program as we continue our conversation on Facebook. 2 News Weekend anchor Riley Phillips will join Jim Wahlberg and others as well as we discuss resources and the help available to those battling addiction.
Well, coming up, a man who has seen the rise and fall and rise again of overdose deaths in the Miami Valley, the grim reality the Montgomery County coroner is seeing and what we can learn from it.
And next, it can affect anyone. We take how opioid users are portrayed and why that is part of the problem. Drug addiction can affect anyone in any walk of life, but that's not how it's always portrayed for addicts. And experts say that's part of the problem. In movies, drug abusers are often depicted as grungy, unintelligent, or living in the streets. But real life can show a very different picture. 2 News reporter Caroline Morris is asking questions after speaking with a person in recovery about how her image was a crucial turning point in her journey.
Me being willing to let go of everything from my old life was what saved my life.
A life that was hanging by a thread, quickly consumed by drug addiction.
I would not go to sleep unless I made sure I had some for the next morning. And whatever I had to do. It didn't matter, break the law, whatever I had to do to get it.
And she did. Chelsea Lawhorn lost count of how many times she faced jail time for her addiction. Despite her roller coaster battle with substance abuse, Chelsea says when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see an image of an addict.
I didn't look much different. I looked kind of like this. It could happen to anybody. It could happen to anybody. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't profile. It doesn't go after a certain person. It could be anyone.
Experts say the stereotypical image of a drug user in our society is part of the problem.
We're surprised, I think, as a community when addiction shows up as someone that we know who lives in the more exclusive neighborhoods, goes to the most exclusive clubs, attended the great schools. Those aren't the people we think of. We think of people who are in entry-level positions, who are less articulate, and who certainly aren't connected in the way that many people who have addiction challenges are.
Adamus staff refuses to call anyone who walks through their doors a drug addict. Instead, they are a person with an addiction. They say the distinction is vital to erase the stigma and start the healing process.
I have an addiction, but I'm better than that, and I'm going to continue to work through my challenges so that I don't go there again.
The profile of a drug abuser is as powerful as the addiction itself. And once conversations start happening, experts believe that's when we'll start to see a difference.
And sometimes just hearing about other people's stories helps folks to be able to realize, oh, that's me, I see myself. It's time for me to do something. Once we kind of normalize the experience for people, then we're going to be able to really finally get rid of the problem with it, and we'll be able to address it in a much more productive way.
Chelsea says she started to become aware of her addiction when she lost everything to afford her new lifestyle. She's been clean for nearly 3 years, but it was her children, grandmother, and fire to fight that broke her free.
Surrendering, like actually surrendering and realizing that I can't just control everything, and I have to start over from scratch and not hold on to anything from my old life. That's what broke me free.
That was Caroline Morse reporting. Coming up, a person who has seen firsthand the reality of the opioid epidemic here in the Miami Valley. We'll talk to the Montgomery County coroner and the valuable lessons he has learned during this crisis. Plus,
one thing that helps me deal with it is we never gave up on her.
Dealing with loss, we hear from a family who has had to face the devastation of addiction firsthand.
a lot has changed over the nearly 2 decades that Dr. Kent Harshbarger has been at the Montgomery County Coroner's Office, including the rise and fall and rise again of drug overdose deaths. 2 News Today anchor Lauren Wood spoke with him recently about the impact of the opioid epidemic on the area and the trends he sees.
As Montgomery County Coroner, Dr. Harshbarger has been on the front lines of the drug crisis. Unfortunately, by the time an addict makes it to his office, it's too late to help them. But the patterns he observes there offer valuable information in the fight against opioids in the Miami Valley. Dr. Kent Harshbarger has seen the Miami Valley through the peaks and valleys of the opioid crisis.
4 years ago, 2017, we didn't know how we were going to be able to handle it, the number of overdose deaths that were coming in. They just kept increasing month by month.
The worst came in the spring of 2017. Dr. Harshbarger says during that time, carfentanil was flooding the streets of Dayton, and it was lethal. In 2017 alone, overdose deaths in the county topped 550. Since then, he says the area has made big strides in its battle against addiction.
Dayton's made a lot of changes with opioid care, basically, addiction care and therapy. So there's a lot more access to treatment, a lot more programs available now in Dayton.
Unfortunately, Dr. Harshbarger says Dayton's location near I-70 and I-75 makes the fight a difficult one.
We have south products being brought in and then northeast products being brought in. They converge here in Dayton. So I think the main theory is that we became sort of a distribution center and perhaps a test market because of that. So they were using unknown products and putting it on the streets here first.
Some of those products are called analogs. They're slightly altered versions of drugs like fentanyl, and they're usually altered to make them more potent. Dr. Harshbarger sees a strong connection between the number of overdose deaths and the amount of analogs on the streets. For a while, things were headed in the right direction.
Dropped dramatically after 17, and now we've continued to creep back up. 2021 will be our busiest year since 2017.
In addition to analogs, they're also seeing lethal drug mixes that include cocaine and methamphetamine. I asked him if he believes COVID is playing a role.
Did COVID amplify it? I'm not really sure, but we are trending upwards.
In 2021, every month but 2 has had more overdose deaths than 2020, and there's been another change.
We had some more spikes, and I don't know that we know why, but we'd have weeks where we'd have a lot and then a week where we didn't have any, and it's probably an availability.
His office is predicting up to 350 overdose deaths this year. That'll be the most since the record-setting year of 2017 as the battle against opioids rages on in the Miami Valley. Lauren Wood, 2 News, working for you.
A service connecting people in need. We learn about East End Community Services and the impact it's having here at home.
Since 2012, East End Community Services in Dayton has connected people with substance abuse disorder to a mentor who has gone through their own recovery. 2 News reporter Allison Gens shares how this peer support program is what's working in Dayton.
They say you only keep what you have by giving it away, so I try my best to give away what I have, to share my experience.
Everett Davis is a certified peer recovery supporter on East End Community Services GROW team. Using his own experiences with substance abuse and a mental health diagnosis, he shares with others who are in crisis that there is hope.
Just to get people, keep them on their feet and stay out of that revolving door of treatment. And just support them in whatever kind of way I can.
East End Community Services started to address issues with affordable and enough housing on the east side of Dayton, and has grown to also encompass job placement, youth programs, mental health, and substance abuse.
When this talks about getting through the opioid crisis or how we're doing with things, we've always been addressing the needs of the community, whatever they were.
Director of Adult and Family Services Karen Vai says they try to make their programs cross-functional.
When they can work together in 3 different programs and they help get this person back on their feet and the person does well, and really, we're not looking for anything other than that feeling of, wow, look what she did. Look how well she did.
East End estimates they help around 5,000 people a year, whether that's one contact or hours worth of intervention.
It's just one person helping other people. And whatever you need in the agency, we try to find.
Recovery case manager and prevention specialist Vicki Visnat is there to help people for however long they need.
And that's what makes it good about my job, because I can meet you in the morning, and if we need to spend all day getting your plan together and talking to you about different stuff and trying to figure out what support you need, I can do that.
Vi says there's still a long way to go addressing addiction in East Dayton, but that's what drives East End to do the work they do every day.
We're still pretty much the highest numbers of overdoses and challenges in that way. It's not easy. It's not easy. We lose people, and that's hard. But everybody gets back up and works together and supports each other, and so we're going to be here for a long time.
In Dayton, Allison Gens, 2 News, working for you.
Well, coming up next, a tough reality for anyone, the devastation and lessons one family has after losing a loved one to addiction.
What every family should know, opioids in Ohio. Presented in partnership with DEA Operation Engage, the Mark Wahlberg Youth Foundation, and community partner Walmart.
Our conversation with Jim Wahlberg continues now. Jim is a recovering addict, and he speaks to us now about what it took to get him into recovery and the hope that comes with it. Jim?
That moment of desperation, when it comes, right, it can be a great catalyst to getting help if we take the chance, right? I want to say this, that almost every person that tries to enter recovery or enter treatment doesn't think it's going to work for them, doesn't think they're worthy of it, doesn't think they're worth it. I know because I was in that situation. I was in state prison in Massachusetts, and I was going to 12-step programs, and I remember feeling in my heart that this was a great program for those people, but it was never going to work for me because I wasn't worth it. And you are worth it. And I want to tell you that recovery is possible. Right? Recovery is possible. If I can find this gift of recovery and stay clean a day at a time, I believe that anybody can.
And I think to your point, sometimes we look at the problem as such a huge thing of how can I do all of this, when really just taking that first step, sending an email or making that first phone call is important to getting the ball rolling. What's one specific thing that adults can do to prevent kids in their homes from being exposed to opioids?
Well, there's really a couple of things. The number one thing is get in that medicine cabinet and clean it out. There's absolutely no reason for you to be holding on to that pain medication that you were prescribed 5 years ago when you twisted your ankle, okay? It's gonna end up in the hands of the wrong person. Many of our addicted young people, that's the first place they got their first pill, was in their parents' medicine cabinet. And the second is communication, right? You know, all my life, when I was a young kid, I can remember people telling me, oh, just one time can be too many and it could kill you. And you know, I'm not sure I believe them, but that has never been more true than it is right now. From a combination of, you know, the counterfeit pills, everything has fentanyl in it now. Everything has fentanyl in it. Fentanyl is 100 times stronger than heroin, okay? 100 times. Fentanyl is what has been killing people across our country for the last, you know, whatever, 5-10 years. So communication is the key. We have to talk to our kids. You know, I remember a mom who lost her child said to me, we talk to our kids about staying away from strangers and not touching a hot stove when they're 2 and 3 years old, right? Why are we not talking about this deadly drugs at that age? As soon as they can understand what we're talking about, we need to get it into their mind that this is poison and it will kill them.
Yeah, prevention is absolutely key here. My last question for you today, let's go back to the DEA 360 program. What's next for that? What's on the horizon for all of you?
So we're still virtual, and but I feel like soon we'll be in person again. We have events, virtual events. I think there's like 15 or 16 more virtual events set up already. So we'll be all around the country. I do want to say that Dayton, Ohio, nobody knows better than Dayton, Ohio about the dangers of this epidemic and the dangers of opioids, right? Ground zero for this epidemic was Dayton, Ohio. More people have died in Dayton, Ohio, I think, per capita than anywhere in the country. So, you know, I stand with Dayton, Ohio, and I stand with the families that have lost their children and their loved ones to this epidemic. And I say no more, man. We can't lose another child. We can't have another family just completely devastated. And I'm not sure sometimes people understand what that means. That means they're gone forever. You're never going to see them again, right? No more Christmases, no more birthdays, no weddings. No, there'll be an empty chair there forever. You know, this is a deadly, deadly, deadly epidemic, and we need to do all that we can. So I want to thank you guys for being part of this event. I want to thank you for participating. When we take this mainstream in prime time, we do so much to attack, not only provide people with information, but attack the stigma attached to this epidemic.
Yeah, and that is why this special is so important, as we do want to be part of the solution here as we focus on such a major problem that is affecting people of all ages here in the Miami Valley. Jim Wahlberg, the executive director of the Mark Wahlberg Youth Foundation, thank you so much for the work that you are doing, and we will set people up with the resources that you have available there. And thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
And we hope you stick around after the program as we continue our conversation on Facebook. 2 News Weekend anchor Riley Phillips will join Jim as we discuss resources available to those battling addiction.
For some families, they never reach the road to full recovery. 2 News reporter Kelly King has one father's heartache and his efforts to raise awareness and offer help to others.
Tanis knew we were there and we loved her.
This is not the fairy tale ending that everyone wants. This is a story of pain and grief, yet one that still offers a glint of hope.
One thing that helps me deal with it is we never gave up on her.
Tanis Sprague was Paul Burtke's stepdaughter. In his case, blood wasn't thicker than water. From the start, she was more like one of his own.
and she was a great little girl.
Paul says in her early teens, she started to drift.
We did not know it, but she was dabbling in cocaine.
That opened the gates for what was to come.
Once is way too many times.
At 18, she moved out and in with a boyfriend. The couple had 2 children together and things were seemingly okay, but they were far from it. At 20, she turned to harder drugs like heroin and meth.
She turned into a young lady that wasn't Tanis anymore, and that's what these drugs can do.
Stealing to feed her habit, she ended up behind bars. Her boyfriend, the father of her first 2 children, overdosed and died in 2015.
Once you dabble in heroin, the addictiveness of that, it just takes over.
After Tanis was released from prison, she was clean for close to a year. She found love again. He was in recovery as well, and they had a child together. But neither stayed on that path, feeding off of each other's weaknesses. A vicious, never-ending cycle. Off and on heroin, in and out of rehab. In January 2020, he OD'd and died.
And she took it hard.
His death sent her into a spiral. By the end of 2020, Paul says she was out of control, overdosing 10 times in a 2-week span.
I just have never seen anybody step up as a stepdad and be so passionate to find help for a stepchild.
To cope, Paul had joined FOA, Families of Addicts, giving Tanis another chance. 30 days at Banyan Treatment Center in Florida.
I was the one that made the call to get her into Florida at Christmas time.
When she came back in the new year, she reverted to her old crowd, overdosing and going to jail again.
What is it going to take for her to get on the road to recovery? And they say you have to hit rock bottom. And the thing that really scared us was rock bottom was death. And we kind of all agreed that might be it. And I mean, in the end it was.
In July 2021, at 33, Tanis overdosed for the last time.
You always pray when somebody goes into treatment that this is going to be the time it works.
Paul is now caring for 3 of Tanis's children. His niece is caring for the youngest. As he still bears the heartache of Tanis's death, he's working to help other families struggling.
I don't have anybody in addiction anymore, but I want to help.
Working to break the stigma and get others the help they need before it's too late.
The thing is his ended in a sad way. That's not every family. There is hope that people can recover, that people do recover.
And doing it all for Tanis.
And I want to save at least one family from going through the same pain that our family had to go through. And if I can do that, one family, I'll feel like I have won.
In Dayton, Kelly King, 2 News, working for you. Well, coming up, opioid hotspots. We'll talk with public health about what they are seeing as cases spike around the Miami Valley. And later,
they take it upon themselves and blame themselves when their parents are struggling.
Having difficult conversations. A child psychologist's advice on how to talk to your children about these issues.
Across Montgomery County, public health workers are seeing a spike in opioid use, overdoses, and deaths. And as the pandemic continues, many worry so could a spike in drug abuse. 2 News reporter Madeline Ashley is digging deeper and shares where we're seeing these opioid hotspots and what can be done to lower numbers in urban and rural areas.
As the COVID-19 pandemic consumes our daily lives, something else also lurks across rural and urban areas in Montgomery County, the opioid epidemic.
It's all over the place. It really doesn't identify certain areas, though you can see upticks in a very rural area where there isn't a great deal of activity or access, and in urban areas where there's more access.
Executive Director of Montgomery County Alcohol, Drug, Addiction, and Mental Health Services, Helen Jones Kelly, says the county's opioid problems began years ago on the county's east side.
It continues to be a problem on the east side of town, but it's now a huge problem as well on the west side of town.
spreading across Montgomery County, impacting several areas.
When we started looking into our opioid epidemic, we found that the West Side used more cocaine, sold some of the other drugs. Once fentanyl was introduced into the drugs that people were using, it hit everywhere.
Then came dangerous mixing as people combined fentanyl with other drugs.
So in the south suburbs, where people have the ability to purchase cocaine, fentanyl was introduced into cocaine. Fentanyl was introduced into marijuana. Fentanyl was introduced to all the substances that people were using or misusing. And that is what became our real problem.
And Kelly says even a hint of fentanyl can be deadly.
But somebody one day figured out how to scrape it off and add it to cocaine, add it to heroin. And it produces such a high for people, but because there's no way of being able to determine how much is going to interact with your physiology, we have all these cases now of people who overdose because they got too much of it.
According to the Montgomery County Overdose Action Team, the city of Dayton has seen the most overdose deaths this year at 127. The second highest, Kettering, with 25 overdose deaths.
But we have typically seen drug overdose activity and drug overdose deaths in the east portion of Dayton. We are starting to see a new and emerging hotspot in northwest Dayton. We also have some kind of hotspots in the west portion of Dayton, out along 35, and some kind of in the southern parts of the county.
With county health leaders fearful of the spike we could see in opioid use and overdoses if the pandemic continues much longer.
Researchers have observed increases in substance use and drug overdoses in the United States since COVID began. And things like increased stress and feeling isolated can lead to increases in alcohol and substance use. So that is obviously a concern.
For those worried about friends or family that might be dealing with opioid addiction, Kelly says, check in on them.
We have to be able to get back to a level of respect and civility and acceptance of one another. We're all Americans. We have to stop defining ourselves in such ways that separate us and get back to defining ourselves in the ways that make us strong as Americans.
In Montgomery County, Madeline Ashley, 2 News, working for you.
Coming up, how do you talk to your kids about addiction? What one expert says you need to know when it comes to navigating these difficult conversations. 1 in 5 children in the U.S. live in a home with a parent who is addicted to drugs or alcohol, which severely affects children's health and development. But what can you do if you're a teacher, a neighbor, a friend, and you suspect a child is being impacted by a parent's addiction? 2 News reporter Kiana Deitzes tells us why being caring and consistent is the best way to help.
Secrets keep you sick. If it is one thing that Kendra Yates has learned in her recovery, it is that storms make people stronger. Both my parents were addicts and I really didn't have a lot of support. Yates was introduced to drugs with her mother when she was 18 years old. 3 years ago, the day after Thanksgiving, I actually overdosed. She says her life took a turn much earlier. Growing up, I just felt very inadequate. I never felt good enough. I didn't like the person I was. And I never really shared that with anyone else. So then when I got introduced to drugs and I got to numb all those thoughts, it was my solution. Like many kids who experience adolescent trauma, she tried to deal with it on her own. In my home, I couldn't talk about what I was going through, and I would go to school and I wear this mask and I would get good grades. And deep down inside, I was just really hurt by my parents. Now, almost 3 years sober, her mission is to help others on their journey to recovery. She's also studying to be a social worker to help kids, realizing that addiction ruins lives across cultures and age groups. In children, it can look like a change in behavior.
You're going to see a decrease in school performance, perhaps a lot of absenteeism, tardiness. You're going to see some mental health stuff coming up for them. This could be behavioral, where it's anger outbursts or isolating. It could also, go into a full-blown mental health disorder such as depression, anxiety.
Heather Stevens, a behavioral health specialist at Dayton Children's, says recognizing those signs is key.
They take it upon themselves and blame themselves when their parents are struggling.
In agreement, EA says it's a natural reaction to blame yourself.
My parents would make a lot of promises, but we're not able to follow through with them ever. So when they would not show up, it made me feel like something was wrong with me. I've always been the kid that woke up at 5 a.m. If I get good enough grades, they'll want to be there for me.
Stephen says when helping a child whose parents are struggling with addiction, remind them that it is not their fault and try to help them deal with their emotions in a healthy way.
Whether that is with a professional service like counseling or a case manager that can help, or as simple as staying involved in their sports or their band or theater.
As a trusted adult, she says it is important to be consistent, engaged, and connected.
It's extremely important that they continue to keep that sense of community around them.
Whether you're a religious leader, a trusted family member, or neighbor, your connection may help lead to a different path down the road.
Reach out to someone and talk about it, because all those secrets that I kept for my parents, I then turned around and did them myself because I didn't know how to deal with them.
Kiana Dyches, 2 News, working for you.
Coming up next, taking the stigma out of addiction. We take you to the annual event in Dayton that helps families.
And a 22-year-old, now nearly 1 year sober, what he has learned on his recovery journey. What started as a small support group for families of addicted people has turned into a large-scale effort to destigmatize addiction and connect hundreds in the Miami Valley to resources that can save their lives.
Families of Addicts, or FOA, is celebrating another year of making a difference and fighting addiction. They celebrate each year by holding an annual rally in downtown Dayton. 2 News reporter Leah Williamson shows us why the rally is so significant to recovery.
Families of Addicts is an organization that seeks to rebuild families and transform lives through the 3 E's: educate, empower, and embrace. And they celebrate that with the annual FOA rally, recognizing the progress of hundreds of people, whether it's been 1 day of clean living or 30+ years.
We're also trying to get rid of the stigma of addiction. They're not back alley drunks and junkies. They're somebody's loved one. They're a human being. They deserve understanding.
Families of Addicts CEO Lori Irion says showing what's possible is their main goal at the rally.
If people don't know that people can have success in recovery, why would they think they could do it?
At the 8th annual FOA rally in August, there was food, fun, and of course, recovery resources. And there at the center of the rally activities, making sure things go well, are the volunteers, many of them touched by addiction themselves.
I didn't even know what heroin was before I got addicted to it. That's why I think this is so important, because awareness is crucial, because I didn't know. I wasn't aware, and that led me to get deeper into my addiction before I understood how dangerous it was.
FOA recognizes that the people going through the addiction aren't the only ones struggling daily.
It was actually crucial to me and my family in my getting sober, because it gave them the ability to understand that it wasn't just me that had all of these negative features with addiction, not being able to stop using. It gave them clarification on my addiction and brought us on common ground.
This year, the number of people addicted to drugs and the number of people dying from overdoses is climbing to painful numbers. A combination of challenges from the coronavirus pandemic and an increase in fentanyl is contributing to the devastating losses. FOA continues to fight to save lives and connect families despite these challenges, and gathering together with nearly 2,000 participants showing love and support is the first step.
This FOA is all about love, and we just want to reach out to all those who are still struggling. There's a safe place for you here at FOA.
You know, one helping another to help another. Where I've been, someone has come, and where they've come, I'm going.
Aaliyah Williamson, 2 News, working for you.
And the FOA is not the only resource providing help here at home. Public Health Dayton and Montgomery County, along with the DEA, have teamed up to create a number of resources for those struggling with addiction. They include programs like GROW, Montgomery County Recover Outreach Project, Dawn, and CarePoint. Other resources like Miami Valley Warm Line, the Get Help Now app from Public Health, Narcotics Anonymous, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and 115 are all programs that will help you if you're in need.
And this is Trevor Miller. Trevor was addicted to meth when he was 19. He's now 22 years old and 9 months sober. He saw firsthand how opioid addiction and other drugs can impact you. He says it took him losing everything to push him to recovery, and believes being an addict is driven by being in a negative environment.
All I gotta say is you're not alone. There's people out there that want to help you. My social life completely and restart. And that's hard to do as a young kid. You're not alone. There's definitely a community out there that, can help you.
Trevor now says he spends a lot of time playing music. It's a passion of his, and he focuses his work and living a drug-free life. All right, we want to thank you all for joining us here tonight.
And we hope that you learned just how addiction affects everyone and how you or a loved one can get the resources needed to recover. And in just a minute, we hope that you will hop on over to our Facebook page. There, our conversation will continue with 2 News Weekend anchor Riley Phillips.